So I'm just going to start by drawing up some hair. A few wispy ones. Now normally I wouldn't draw this with a pencil, I would just leave it to my brush, but I want to show you perhaps the area where I would keep my white sections is going to be about here. And then obviously if this girl had shoulders showing, that'd be here, but the hair's just going to come down just beyond her shoulders. My first colour that I'm going to use is just a yellow ochre. If you don't have a yellow ochre, you can create it by adding a purple, a pinky purple to yellow. And what I want to do, I'll really wet this first actually, but I've got colour in my brush so you can see where I'm wetting. I'm going to leave lots of white gaps as I wet this. The paper isn't fully wet. I've wet my brush, sorry, it's a bit misleading. I've wet my brush a lot, as you can see. So the paint moves around well, but I'm actually bossing the paint. I'm moving the paint around. The direction, I'm using a chisel because it's giving me directive strokes. So I want to have that vertical feeling. And I'm quite okay with that, just laying something down, just laying some colour down. And that is my lightest layer. Now I'm going to leave the chisel and go to a round. I'll usually use a round brush that forms a point for hair anyway, but I think for a beginner a chisel will be better if you use it in that way. Be aware of the way the hair is growing. So going back to my pencil, this is the top of the head, and then she's got a part here. So the hair's growing this way, down, coming towards us this way. This is the back of her head, and then it's growing over and down this way. So we have to be aware of the direction of the hair. Now, I'm going to soften this off a little bit by actually wetting the paper. Just that patch of white there, but I do not intend to paint into it too much. I'm just coming up into it with just a drier colour on my brush. I haven't got a huge amount of water on my brush either, or in the palette. And that's going to give me those softer edges of breaking up that white area. Always start with much more white than you think that you would like. That's a key thing. Now I'm going into a darker brown, and I have a brown here from Sennelier watercolor. It's more like a golden brown. I have had my paints for so long that I forget the names of a lot of them. This is more, I would call this more of a Van Dyke brown, because remember Van Dyke brown being more of a golden brown than a warm reddish brown. It's got a yellowness about it. So if you have a brown that's not too yellow, so I'll show you the colour here. I think it's a nice deeper version for yellow ochre. But if your brown is quite like my Derwent brown, which if you have a look at it, yes, it is darker, but it's also got more of a reddish hint to it. That's fine. These two would work together. That's okay, because that's not predominantly red tinted, and this is gold, got golden hues to it. But if you can see, I could put some of this brown into it and it doesn't look disassociated. So they would work together. This will be my darkest dark brown, and then this brown here will be my medium tone brown. If you had a brown that had a lot of blue in it, so maybe it's a burnt umber and it's a bluish brown, remember your color wheel, and you just have to go, if a brown has got a lot of blue in it, you have to warm it up. So you go to the other side and add your orange to that brown. So once I've got this base layer down, and don't worry about a mess, try not to have hairs that are going crisscross in the wrong direction to begin with, but just don't worry too much about it being a bit messy at this stage, because we are building up quite a lot of work over the top of this first layer. So, and by that I mean now we've got a highlight area we're protecting. We need to start getting a few directional lines in at the crown. And this is a harder stroke for beginners because I'm curving my hand while I'm making this mark. That's something you may remember you want to turn the page a little bit to do. Now I'm using the stiletto, which means I'm dragging the tip of my finger and the tip of the brush down the page, and I'm standing up to paint this because I'm doing my rehearsal first over the paper, then I'm moving my whole arm, then I simply go down lower to let my hand finally touch the paper. And I'm repeating this as much as I can, forward and back. So it's like a pendulum on a clock. I'm hitting the brush at its lowest and I'm picking it up either side, leaving gaps to make sure that I can see that colour from the first layer coming underneath. Now, problems that you may have. Your pressure may not be able to be as light as mine, and because you're using a bigger brush, you're getting thick lines. You can have thick lines at this stage, but remember it's hair, so we want to build up that feeling of fine hair and fine lines. So do practice that dragging your finger along and that pressure, so that there's the paper. I'm barely touching the page with the tip, so it can only make a fine mark. If you have trouble with this, and different people do have different issues with paintbrushes, go and buy a liner or a rigger brush, and you'll see that the length of the bristle is way longer than the thickness of the brush. If I compare a bigger size, like a size 5, you can see the bristles are even longer than a size 5 brush, and it's primarily used to do very fine line work in watercolor. Or acrylic. I've used an acrylic as well. Just be aware of where you're holding it. If you're holding it down too low, then you're likely to press too heavy again. If you can hold it back a little bit, and remember, release that finger to give you some balance and leverage, then, and rehearse over here, you can see the fine line that it does create. So I'm going up into this lighter area a little bit. And this is where you would turn the page to give yourself that little bit of ease with the way your hand is sitting. I'll do some on this side now. Remember to keep it loose, which means you may want a few that are not fitting in at all. They're going wayward. I've practiced these marks over the years of being a portrait artist and a fashion illustrator, so yes, I do make it look easy, but this is what you should be guided by to practice until you feel that same ease. And it will come. It's just repetition. This is not a very difficult way to paint. It's just practice does make it a lot easier. So I'm going to continue to use this now, but I'm using less water. I'm still having a damp mix. You can see the paint's moving around on the palette, but I'm introducing a lot more color. Now, if it becomes too dry on the paper, I want you to just wet the brush a little bit and add it back in. Not a huge amount, perhaps just dip the bottom half or third of the bristle into your water container. Try and start working in the center of an area as well, and extend both above and below that area. And this is just on repeat now, so I'll speed this up a little bit and we'll just watch the progress. I'm using it more like a wash now to darken up some of these areas. So even though I'm still using the rigger brush, I'm flattening it. I'm no longer using my finger upright. I'm putting the pad of my hand down. And I'm slowing down my strokes a little bit so that more of the edges, the whole length of the bristle is getting onto the page. And that's giving me more of a covered wash area, or a flatter, bigger area of colour that's going down. Now I'm going to just encroach up into this area because it is too large. But better to have a large highlight area left in the beginning than too small, because you won't bring up your nice shiny highlights. So now I'm going back to my yellow ochre, and I'm doing the same thing as before, but I'm just encroaching more and more into this white paper. I've slowed down, and I'm also using more of the pad of my hand so that my brush is not so pointed, a little bit more sandshoe flat to the page. Watering it down a bit as well just gives you those sneaky little soft areas that you can move around a bit more. It's not all line work, it's a balance of wash and line for hair. That's a bit severe. So now I'm happy with that. It's starting to give me a little bit more reality with not so much shine on the hair. Now I might do the same thing with the brown, the darker brown. So what I'm doing in this way is I'm controlling the shine of the hair. I'm leaving the shine there, and I'm also putting some darks in down here that will allow me to make the lights look lighter. And as you go, you continue to work down the bottom, fading bits off. Depends on if their hair is cut flat across or wispy at the bottom, but it's up to you. Same marks, you're just putting heavier shading in certain areas, repeating the stroke, but altering it a tiny bit by moving your hand, the angle of your arm. It's the subtle gradation that's built up that makes the hair work. You can't do hair to this detail quickly. You must work stroke and stroke and stroke if you want the realism. It's those individual little tizzy strokes that make it look like it's individual hairs. And if you don't have them, it won't be believable. I'm getting to the stage where I'm really darkening up some of these areas, because remember, the stronger the contrast, the higher the shine. And if you've watched any of my previous videos, what I'm doing now, you can go back and see the dry brush technique, which is very rarely used in watercolor anymore, but it's one of my go-to little secret helpers. And this is where the brush is quite dry. You have a tiny amount of color on the brush, and the paper is getting dry. But it gives you the ability to put these tiny, faint, beautifully controlled marks down. And cat's whiskers, dog whiskers, fine hair, that's eyelashes, all these really fine situations for lines, and that's my secret go-to, is dry brush technique. So finishing off now, and I'm just going to sharpen up some of these dark areas down here, neaten up the bottoms a little bit. But I don't want the darkest part to be down the bottom. I want it to be sort of in the nape of the back of the neck. So the hair's falling in a bit, which means it's casting a bit more shadow, a bit more depth. And that's about it. So I hope you can learn from that and have a practice. Let me know how you go. Thanks for joining me, guys, and let's be creative.